we're going to talk about what is reasonable and how the term reasonable is going to apply to somebody using a concealed carry permit or legally carrying a firearm. Now, I have to admit my bias toward this, my training is in law enforcement and security, armed professionals. And so generally when I teach this, that's who I'm talking to. And so we talk a lot about the Supreme Court cases, Graham versus Connor, Tennessee versus Garner. But in those, they talk about reasonable officers, and that does not always apply to us as armed citizens. And so we're going to break it down a little more than that. Okay, when we talk about a reasonable person is a legal fiction. What a legal fiction is a fact that's created by the courts. It's something that's not true, but they need to assume that it's true for the purpose of making decisions. There are no, 100% reasonable persons. But basically what we need to do is we have to create a standard that we could judge somebody's conduct by, okay? And so basically, for an action to be reasonable, somebody has to have a duty to be reasonable, and somebody of similar and like training, similar or like circumstances are going to act that way, okay? If you're going to carry a gun, then it's reasonable for you to know the law. It's reasonable for you to use some restraint. If you did not, then most other people in that circumstances would. Therefore, if you don't, you're not like the majority of other people in that same circumstance. The problem with reasonableness is there is no precise definition. You can't, put in a law, codify, this action is reasonable, but this action is not reasonable, because it depends on the circumstance. It depends on the totality of the incident, right? You can't say you can never ever do this, because there's exceptions, all right? For something to be reasonable, you have to look at the sum total of the circumstance. You have to be very careful to make sure that you've got all the facts. And when you're looking at the facts, you're looking at, what the person who made the decision, whether or not, what they did was reasonable or not, you have to see what they knew, okay? And when you look at what the person knew to make the decision of whether their action was right or not, reasonable or not, don't get confused about subjective versus objective. Okay, subjective is what they believe or what their intent is. I didn't mean to shoot him, whatever. Objective is what you can prove, what they actually knew, what somebody can logically believe. He was 100 pounds heavier than me. He's wearing a karate suit with a black belt. He's hi-ya and kicking. I can logically believe that this guy has a weight advantage in me, and that he's a martial artist, and that he's a threat to me, right? And it's important to note that when you look at use of force, or you look at an action to see if it's reasonable, it's got to be judged, not on what the person believes to be right, but what would somebody of that level of training believe to be right, okay? Your intent is irrelevant. It doesn't matter what you meant to do. It counts of what you knew. I thought he was going to hurt me is different than, he had a gun and said he was going to hurt me, right? And you're not going to be judged based upon what you believe. It's people who weren't there looking at the facts, looking at what's going on. Do I think, would I have done what he did, right? Working at a place, and I don't want to give too many details to it, but it wasn't the state. And we had a storm coming in, and the weather was getting pretty dangerous. And the people that we were working with, we had a duty to protect them. We decided, or the boss decided, not to let them go, to basically keep the doors open, even though every other job in that same industry, in that same area, their supervisors said, we've got an ice storm coming, we're going to close our doors. And when we talked to the boss over it, He said, you know, I get to determine what's reasonable, and I want to keep the doors open. Well, I explained to him about, you know, it doesn't matter what you believe. It matters what, you know, if somebody gets in a car crash and dies, you know, what can we prove in court? What we can say in court is everyone else with your level of training understood the risks and took precautions. You know, why didn't you? Okay, so it's not what you know, it's what, you know, you can prove. Okay, like I said, what a person believes is not relevant. Okay, you can be mad at somebody, but your anger is irrelevant. Okay, we want to know what we can prove, what somebody looking at the circumstances would know to be true. Okay, one of the things what you believe to be relevant is if you carry a gun, you've got to know the law. Okay, um, because a reasonable person would know if I'm going to carry a gun, I should know the law. So if you unknowingly violate the law, you know, you carry your gun where you're not supposed to, I didn't know isn't an excuse, because the vast majority of other people with your level of training would know they should know whether or not they should carry a gun in that location. Okay? You know, that person's a threat to me or not. So when you look at reasonableness, it's not, I think I was right. It's would other people in your situation believe that you were right. Your use of force is going to be judged when it's judged to be right or not. Like I said, it's not going to be judged by you. It's going to be judged by a jury of your peers. You're the judge, you know. And when they judge you, they have to look at, would a normal person in that situation behave the way that you behaved? Not looking at, you know, what we know now. Like an example of that would be, you know, if somebody pointed a toy gun at you. You know, if it's one of these airsoft guns that look realistic, you know, turns out that it's not, they can't say, well, it was a toy gun if everything at the scene of the incident made you believe that it was a gun. If other people would have thought that it's a gun, then you could say it was a gun. Now, if the darn thing's painted blaze orange and it looks like a big, you know, water pistol, you know, then you're not going to say, I thought it was a gun, because most people would say, no, dude, that's a water pistol. Does that make sense? You know, this is a pretty complicated subject. You know, they start talking about the calculus of negligence, you know, and I'm not a lawyer, and this is the internet. So um, I would hope that you would read the article where we cover this more in depth. But beyond that, this is something that you need to get a good instructor in your area to teach you about, where you can have some interaction between you and them. Basically, this is just an introduction, a very down and dirty short introduction, you know, to define the term for you. And it should not be construed as, you know, the end of your training, but rather the beginning. But anyway, I appreciate you watching this video. I hope that you learned a little bit, even though it was a little long-winded. And as always, you can catch us online at www.tngun.com.